The air above Japan on the morning of August 14, 1945 felt unnaturally still. A stillness that did not comfort, a stillness that suffocated. Even the wind seemed hesitant, as though it feared carrying sound that might change the course of history. In Tokyo, the coup was crushed, but the city was far from calm. Soldiers moved through the streets with rigid discipline, rifles at their sides, eyes scanning rooftops for rebels who might resist the emperor's decision. Civilians whispered behind closed doors. Shops remained shuttered. Families held each other in dark rooms, awaiting a voice none had ever heard before, the voice of the emperor. The recording was safe, hidden, guarded, ready, but it would not be broadcast until the next day, August 15th. And in those final 24 hours of silence, the deadliest kind of silence, anything could still happen. At the kamikaze training base near Yokosuka, Saburo Kameda awoke to the sound of officers shouting orders outside the barrack. He rushed outside. A cluster of senior officers stood around the jeep, arguing loudly. "We must launch now." "No, you heard the Palace ALL operations suspended. The Emperor hasn't spoken yet. Until then, we continue the war." "That's treason. You will ruin everything. We have orders from the Army General Staff, and we have orders from the Emperor's chamber." Every sentence clashed with another like swords meeting in the dark. Kameda stood frozen, watching men of rank lose control of themselves. For the first time since he had joined the Air Force, he saw terror in their eyes, not fear of the enemy, but fear of each other. One officer grabbed Kameda by the arm. You're trained. Get to your aircraft." Another officer yanked him away. "No one flies. Not unless the Emperor himself orders it." Kameda stumbled back, breathless. He felt the war splitting apart beneath his feet, orders tearing, loyalties fracturing, the chain of command collapsing like a burning bridge. A whistle pierced the air. Dozens of soldiers sprinted toward the flight line. Trucks roared into motion. Pilots ran toward the aircraft, some willingly, some because they feared disobeying. Explosives were loaded under the wings of shabby wooden trainers. Fuel was pumped into tanks by men whose hands shook uncontrollably. It was clear. A faction was trying to launch kamikaze aircraft before the Emperor's surrender could reach the public. A final blood offering. A final act of defiance. A final attempt to drag Japan into an honorable death. Kameda's stomach twisted. He understood immediately. If they launched before the surrender was broadcast, the war would continue. More cities would burn. Millions more could die. And the Americans would respond with fire Japan could not survive. He stepped forward. "Sir, what are our orders?" he shouted desperately. An officer turned to him, eyes wild, desperate, furious. "Our orders," the officer growled, "are to strike. America must know Japan will never kneel." Kameda's blood ran cold. "No," a second officer yelled, shoving the first aside. "WWII. This base is under Imperial command, not under army fanatics." A fist flew, then another. A rifle but cracked against someone's jaw. Men yelled, grappled, fell to the ground. Kameda stared in disbelief as Japanese officers fought each other like trapped enemies. Then one of the fanatics screamed, "Ignite the fuel truck. We launch in 5 minutes." Kameda froze. Fuel truck. Loaded aircraft. Explosives on wing. One spark would incinerate the entire base. This was no longer war. This was chaos. This was suicide without purpose. He stepped back, trembling. "Please, someone stop this. Please, someone end this." He didn't finish the thought, because at that exact moment, gunfire erupted. A loyalist company stormed the base, rifles raised. "Stand down! Stand down! By order of the Emperor, all operations cease. Surrender your weapons." Bullets cracked through air. Men scattered. Others dropped to their knees. Those who resisted were tackled, disarmed, beaten. The fanatical officer tried to run to the fuel truck. A loyal soldier tackled him before he reached it. Kameda exhaled sharply, the breath of a man who had just glimpsed death and watched it pass. The base fell silent, utterly silent. The coup had failed. The final kamikaze launch had been stopped. And for the first time, Kameda realized he might actually live to see peace. He sank to his knees. Tears welled in his eyes. He did not wipe them away. While chaos burned across Japan, the skies above Iwo Jima were clear. At 10 o'clock sharp, the Mustangs of the 78th Fighter Squadron reached cruising altitude. The B-29s followed behind, shimmering in the sunlight like silver giants. The Pacific stretched endlessly beneath them, blue, serene, deceptively peaceful. Jerry Yellin scanned the horizon. Something felt different. Something tense. Something final. Tapp's voice crackled over the radio. "Stay sharp, boys. Japan is unpredictable today." Jerry replied, "Copy," eyes wide. As they approached the Japanese coastline, the tension increased. The radios picked up static. Radar stations on the American fleet detected unusual signals. And then, just east of Tokyo, Yellin saw them. Small silhouettes rising into the air. 4, maybe 5, climbing slowly. Deliberate. Contact. 11 o'clock. he shouted. Tapp responded instantly. Everyone tightened formation. Those could be last-ditch interceptors. Jerry's pulse quickened. He pushed the throttle forward. The Mustang surged ahead. For the first time in days, the sky had enemies. And Jerry knew, instinctively, painfully, this would be the last fight. This was the moment. The war's final spark. On the ground below, at Yokosuka Base, Kameda heard the distant echo of engines. He looked up. High above the haze, he saw glints of silver P-51 Mustangs slicing across the sky like blades. Behind them, Dot's Japanese aircraft rose desperately to meet them. Kameda felt a hollow ache in his chest. Who are they? Why are they still flying? Don't they know the war is ending? He recognized the silhouettes. Ki-44s, Ki-84s. A conscript flight of Ki-43s, old, damaged, underpowered, piloted by men who refused to accept defeat. He whispered, "No, no, turn back. The war is over. Turn back." But they climbed, and the Mustangs turned toward them. In the sky above Tokyo Bay, Jerry Yellin locked eyes with the approaching fighter's tiny spakes that grew larger with each passing second. He felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. Not triumph, not anger, not even fear. Just focus, pure, cold focus. This is it, he thought. This is the end. The Japanese formation broke apart. Two fighters dove, two climbed, one leveled off, guns flashing. Jerry banked hard. The Mustang groaned. Tracers streaked past his canopy. The last dogfight of World War II had begun. The sky above Tokyo Bay shimmered beneath the August sun, its surface rippling like polished steel. Layers of haze drifted between the coastal mountains, the ruined cities, the battered ports. It was the kind of morning that felt frozen in time, bright, sharp, unbearably quiet. Then the silence shattered. 5 Japanese fighters burst through the haze, engines screaming, sunlight glinting off their chipped paint. Their formation was shaking, and even, not from fear, not from poor training, but from exhaustion. These men had flown for years. They had seen friends vanish in flame. They had watched the sky turn against them, and yet they climbed, because for them, surrender had not yet been spoken, and this was the last sky they still had. Jerry Yellin's Mustang cut through the air with lethal grace, its Merlin engine roaring with hunger. He saw the Japanese formation rise. He felt the familiar pull in his gut, and instinct sharpened by countless missions. Contact confirmed, he radioed. Tapp, I'm moving to intercept. Copy, Tapp replied. Let's finish this. But there was no triumph in his voice, only weight. The weight of knowing these might be the last enemies he ever faced. The Mustangs banked left as one unit, their silver wings slicing through the sunlight. The Japanese fighters split. 2 dove, 3 climbed. One at the rear wobbled, coughing smoke from its exhaust. Jerry targeted one of the climbers. This is it, he thought. The last duel. Below, at the Yokosuka base, Saburo Kameda stood frozen. He watched the tiny spakes swirling above the coastline. He recognized the desperation. He recognized the truth. The last Japanese pilots were fighting, not for victory, not for honor, but because no one had told them to stop. Orders had not reached them. Command had collapsed. The coup had delayed communication, and so these men, these last pilots, were dying for nothing more than miscommunication. Kameda felt a scream rise in his throat. Stop! Stop! The war is ending. But the sky did not hear him. The sky was too far, too loud, too fast. He dropped to his knees as 2 fighters clashed in a spiral. High above, Jerry rolled sharply, bullets ripping from his wings in bright line. The Japanese Ki-44 cut across his nose in a high G-turn, black smoke trailing like a torn banner. Jerry pulled up, the world inverted. The sun flashed off his canopy. He felt the Mustang vibrate under stress. He had fought dozens of engagements, but never one like this. This was not a battle. This was a funeral. The Japanese pilot ahead of him, Jerry could see him now, leaned forward in the cockpit, pushing his machine beyond its limits. His engine coughed black soot. His wings trembled violently. Jerry's guns found him. 3 short bursts, precise, deadly. Rounds tore through the Ki-44's fuselage. Flames erupted from the engine. The canopy shattered. The Japanese fighter spiraled downward, slow, almost graceful, until it struck the bay in a plume of white spray. Splash 1. Jerry whispered. His voice broke. Another Japanese fighter lunged toward a B-29. Tapp intercepted, diving with the full fury of the Mustang's power. His round struck the enemy's tail, shredding its wooden frame. The Ki-43 disintegrated midair, fragments scattering like burning petals. The pilot never had a chance. 3 Mustangs surrounded the remaining fighters. Jerry's voice came over the radio, strained. Knock them out fast. Don't let them climb. Don't let them suffer. The Mustangs pounded. A Ki-84 tried to break away, but its engine sputtered. It stalled. It dropped heavily. A Mustang finished it with a single, merciful burst. The final Japanese fighter turned toward the mount, climbing desperately through thin air. Its pilot did not try to engage. He did not try to strike. He simply tried to escape the inevitable. Jerry followed. The chase lasted only seconds, but it felt eternal. He lined up the shot. He hesitated. Break off, please, Jerry whispered. Break off. But the pilot continued to climb toward the sun, toward silence, toward death. Jerry pressed the trigger. The Mustang's guns roared. The Japanese fighter's tail ripped apart. It flipped violently and plunged into the valley below. And suddenly, there were no more targets, no more fighters, no more enemies. Only sky, only silence, only the realization that the last aerial battle of the Second World War had just ended. On the ground, Kameda watched the final aircraft vanish behind a hill. He felt the impact through the earth. Dust rose, smoke curled, silence followed. He covered his face with his hand. Tears poured down. Unstoppable. Why? He whispered. Why were they still in the air? A senior officer approached him slowly, his face pale with grief. Because the message was delayed, the officer said. They didn't know. Nobody told them to stop. Kameda's cries grew heavier, more desperate. They died for nothing. They didn't need to die. The officer kneeled beside him. No, he said soft. But in war, the last men always die for nothing. Kameda collapsed into his arm, and for the first time, he hated the sky he once worshipped. Above, Jerry Yellin turned his Mustang back toward the Pacific. His fuel gauge showed enough to return. His guns were empty. His lungs felt hollow. The radio crackled. Mission complete. RTB. Jerry didn't answer. He looked at the sky around him. Empty, infinite, haunted. This is the last one, he whispered. He knew it. He felt it. Every pilot felt it. The war had just fought its final heartbeat. In Tokyo, hours later, the Emperor's message would be broadcast. Mothers would fall to their knees. Soldiers would drop their rifles. Entire cities would weep. And Japan would finally exhale after years of fire. But in this moment, in the sky above Tokyo Bay, the war had already ended, because Jerry had fired the last shot, and 5 Japanese pilots had made the last climb. The final duel was over. The world, for the first time in years, was beginning to go quiet. The sky, the murderous, glorious, broken sky, finally stopped breathing. The night of August 14th fell upon Japan with the weary gentleness of a last breath. The fires that had burned for days before had turned to embers. The smoke that for months had obscured the sun now seemed thinner, almost timid, as if the disaster itself were losing its force immediately afterward. In the streets of Tokyo, people gathered near radios, temples, and bargain basement stalls. No one knew exactly why. No one had been officially summoned, but everyone felt something, a vibration in the air, a weight on their chest, a murmur that seemed to come from the very ground. Tomorrow, everything changes. But hundreds of miles away, Jerry Yellin was just landing on Iwo Jima after the final combat mission of World War II. His Mustang touched down with a soft jolt. He taxied toward the revetment, cut the engine. Silence filled the cockpit, a silence he had never felt before. Not the silence of exhaust, not the silence after battle. Something deeper, something final. Ground crew approached, but slowly, cautiously, as though approaching a man who carried ghosts on his shoulders. Tapp walked toward him, helmet under his arm. You okay, Jerry? Yellin removed his goggles. His eyes were red. I shot down a man, he whispered. The last one. Tapp didn't speak. He couldn't. Jerry stepped down from the Mustang and looked across the field. Dozens of P-51s gleamed under the setting sun. Not one was preparing for takeoff. Not one mechanic rushed. Not one officer shouted. The war was done. Even if no one had officially said it yet, the sky itself felt different. Lighter, wider, quieter, as if it had decided to stop killing. In Yokosuka, Saburo Kameda sat alone just outside his barracks, staring at the horizon. His hands trembled. He had watched his comrades try to take off that morning. He had watched loyal soldiers drag them from cockpits. He had watched fanatics attempt to ignite fuel trucks. He had watched men scream, cry, collapse. And above the chaos, he had watched the sky turn into a grave. He whispered, voice cracking. Why didn't they listen? Why didn't they stop? A sergeant approached him quietly. Kameda. It's over. Kameda closed his eyes. Officially, the sergeant nodded, tears welling. The Emperor will speak at noon tomorrow. Japan will surrender. Kameda felt something break inside him. Not from sadness, not from shame, from release. A release so overwhelming he felt he might collapse. He fell forward, hands on the dirt, breath trembling uncontrollably. The sergeant placed a hand on his back. You survived, he whispered. You were meant to live. Kameda didn't feel worthy of those words. Not when so many who believed, honestly believed, had died in burning steel, but he accepted. For the first time since the war began, he felt the possibility of a life beyond duty. August 15, 1945. Noon approached. The air over Tokyo was thick with anticipation. No sirens, no engines, no commands. People gathered around radios in factories, homes, temples, ruined. Children stood silently beside their parents. Old soldiers held their breath. A crackle, a pause, a faint hum. Then, the voice no one had ever heard. The Emperor of Japan. His words were archaic, ceremonial, almost impossible to decipher, but their meaning was unmistakable. The war has ended. A gasp spread across the nation. Some cried, some screamed, some bowed until their foreheads touched the ground. Some simply collapsed where they stood. Kameda fell to his knees, hands covering his face. It's over, he whispered. It's finally over. Around him, pilots sobbed openly. Officers wept in silence. Even hardened sergeants lifted their eyes to the sky, a sky that felt impossibly gentle. No more orders, no more missions, no more death. On Iwo Jima, the announcement reached the pilots through static-filled speakers. Jerry Yellin stood among the others as the message played. He didn't cheer. He didn't clap. He didn't shout. He simply closed his eyes. He saw every pilot he had lost, every friend who had burned, every enemy who had fallen, every sky he had flown. He whispered, "Let the sky rest." The wind carried his words. Jerry Yellin, he survived the war. He returned home. But part of him stayed in that last battle. Frozen in the moment he fired the final shot of the last war the world would ever allow to go global. Years later, he would say, "I killed a man who didn't need to die. The war was ending." But he didn't know. And every time he remembered the sky that day, clear, bright, merciless, he felt a tear behind his eye. Not of guilt, not of shame, but of sorrow that two young men, born on opposite sides of the world, met for 1 second in the air, only because no one told them the war was already over. Saburo Kameda, he lived. He walked away from the runway he was meant to die on. He never flew again, not because he feared the sky, but because he understood it too deeply. He became a teacher. He raised a family. He aged quietly. But every August, he looked to the sky, and every August, he remembered the last pilots who climbed after sunrise, men who flew into a war that had already died. He carried their memory as a prayer and a warning. The sky over Japan slowly healed. Clouds drifted freely once again. Birds reclaimed the air. Children looked upward without fear. Smoke cleared. Silence softened. Blue returned. From Tokyo to Iwo Jima, from Yellin to Kameda, from victory to surrender, the sky had finally been given back to humanity. No propellers. No flame, no scream, no engine roars, just silence. A silence earned in blood, sealed in sacrifice, and remembered through time. A silence that whispered, "Never again." And when the final engines cooled, when the last pilot fell into the sea, when the Emperor's voice echoed across a shattered nation, the sky, that vast, roaring, burning sky, finally surrendered to silence. A silence bought with courage, a silence etched in sacrifice, a silence carried for the rest of their lives by men like Jerry Yellin and Saburo Kameda, two souls who never met, yet were forever bound by the same last battle. The war was over, and the world would never climb into the sky the same way again.